Unit 2, page 4. Aim. How does the cell membrane help the cell? Do now. Let's review. Write down what the function of the cell membrane is. Also, what do you think might happen if a cell didn't have one? Take a moment to do that now. Today we'll cover two objectives. We'll discuss the plasma membrane or cell membrane's function, and we'll also relate the function of this membrane to something called a fluid mosaic model, which we'll show in some pictures later on. So hopefully you got that the cell membrane allows substances to move in and out of the cell. If it didn't exist, cells wouldn't be able to get those materials, and it potentially could die. All cells, all living things have to balance, and they have to allow certain things to be able to be inside the cell and certain things to stay on the outside. In order to do this, it needs a cell membrane to let those materials pass through. This balance that all living things have to have is called homeostasis. This is a very, very important word for this class, and you will definitely see it again. So try to remember it at this point. Also, selective permeability. That's a term that we use to describe how the cell membrane can choose what gets to come into the cell and what can't. So here's a picture of our cell, and that cells have to keep the inside and outside. How do they do this? Well, certain things get to come in, like food, salts, oxygen, and water. And just as things come in, other things might come out. So things like waste, products, need to come out of the cell. When you build a membrane, though, you have to have some material that will allow the water that's inside the cell to be separate from the water that's outside the cell. So think about this. What substance do you know that doesn't mix with water? If you've ever cooked, you probably know the answer to this question. Oil. Oil is a type of fat. We also call fats lipids. So oil and water, fats and water, don't mix together. So this is a really good material to build a membrane. Now let's zoom in. So we have lipids of the cell membrane. This is a zoomed in portion of the cell membrane. Notice it's kind of cut off, so it would continue all the way around the cell, inside the cell and outside the cell. Notice that it has two rows of circles, and attached to those circles are kind of these little legs. And then we're zoomed in on one on the right. So the kind of fat or the kind of lipid that a membrane is made out of is called a phospholipid. All right, and it basically has a split personality. The top part, the phosphate, and the bottom part, the lipid. The phosphate is attracted to water, while the lipid is repelled by water. Notice that there's a double membrane, okay, so there's two layers here. So we actually call it a phospholipid, because of the type of lipid it is, bilayer, bi meaning two. Think of like a bicycle, has two wheels. So when we zoom in a little bit more, we look at the makeup of this layer. And we describe it as a fluid mosaic model. Notice that there are all of these different pieces, and it's relatively complex. And this would continue all around the cell. Phospholipids actually move, that's why it's called fluid. So the membrane doesn't stay in one exact position, but it actually moves around and lets different materials go through. You'll also notice that these are protein channels that substances might need in order to enter or leave the cell. So again, permeable means if things can pass through or not. So semi-permeable means that certain things can come through. So the cell membrane basically controls what things get to go into the cell or out. Some materials, but not all, need to come through. So what needs to get across the membrane? Sugar, lipids, AA stands for amino acids, which are used to build proteins, oxygen, water, salt, and waste. What molecules can get through the cell membrane directly? So fats and oils can pass directly through. Well, what about everything else? Cell membrane sometimes has to help out materials to get through the membrane. The way this is it basically makes little doors. We call those doors protein channels. Certain channels will allow certain materials, and they're very specific. So there's a water channel, salt channel, sugar channel, etc. Notice that the sugar can only go through the channel meant for sugar. Amino acids, same thing. So now let's go over the cell. Why is the cell membrane so important to an organism? Take a moment to think about that. The cell membrane regulates the necessary materials to go in and out of the cell. Remember that every living thing has to maintain balance, which is homeostasis. If it wouldn't have a cell membrane, or if it wouldn't be able to maintain balance, again, that organism would simply die or have some sort of disease that would make it difficult to live.